Down 1.7% here, a loss of 37 points or so. Apple shares are just getting hammered this morning.
We're down by between 3 and 4.5% generally across these markets. Let's talk about the speed with which we are watching this market deteriorate. We're red everywhere, essentially, down by 4, 5.
At the start of the COVID pandemic last year, the federal government had to take urgent action to avoid economic oblivion. It came up with the JobKeeper scheme, a great success that gave struggling businesses billions of dollars to pay their workers. 700,000 jobs were saved. But more than 150,000 companies that weren't in trouble, many of them actually thriving, still stuck their hands out and received 13 billion taxpayer dollars.
Today I have a presentation on dynasties. But I refuse to talk about the ancient history and drama. That's just the patriarchy. Instead, I'm going to talk about a dynasty that I actually look up to. An all-women dynasty. Women of color. Gay women. Women who fight for social justice.
The 2008 financial crash. COVID pandemic bailouts. Woke culture being promoted by what seems like every company now. The culture and trends we have seen in the 2000s can all be traced back to one company, BlackRock. So who is BlackRock, and how do they have a hand in the topics I just mentioned? Well, to start, we have to go back to one man, Larry Fink.
The markets have had sort of a rocky road, can we say, so far this year. As you look forward, is there any real prospect they can recoup in the second half of the year?
Probably not totally.
Larry Fink was born to a wealthy family on November 2nd, 1952, in Los Angeles, California. He is Jewish descent and has 2 other siblings, a brother and a sister. His father owned his own shoe store, and his mother was an English professor. His early career was spent pursuing politics, where he would gain a BA in political science at UCLA Anderson School of Management. A little while after that, he would later change his focus to banking and real estate. While he was attending school, he was immersing himself among the elite and became a full-time member of the secretive Kappa Beta Phi. This is a group with members that include Michael Bloomberg and the Goldman Sachs chairman.
We've kind of gotten used to BlackRock beating the numbers, beating expectations. That's certainly the case this time around.
With his previous education and the special connections he made along the way, Larry received many offers from some of the top investment banks. He eventually settled with First Boston, though, which was a boring New York investment bank where he worked on structuring and trading bonds. Although nothing about it was boring to Larry, though, he quickly took advantage of the opportunity given to him and became one of the highest-earning employees, generating over $1 billion for his bank. He rose up the ladder tremendously fast and became the legend on Wall Street by developing the debt securitization market. The debt securitization market is basically where loans, like car loans, credit card loans, and mortgages, would be bundled together, sliced into pieces, and sold to other investors. If this sounds eerily familiar, well, it's because these are the same mortgage-backed securities that led to the 2008 meltdown. But before that happened, this securitization of debt was considered extremely innovative. It transformed the face of finance. All of a sudden, if you're a giant bank or a pension fund, or whatever that wants to invest in the housing market, you can now invest in a mortgage-backed security made up of thousands of hopefully safe loans. Larry created one of the main tools that led to the meltdown, and he was also the one the US Treasury hired to clean it up. But back to the previous point, his success was so outstanding that his colleagues thought that he was eventually going to run the firm one day. Suddenly though, in 1986, his risky business practices had finally caught up to him. His house of cards was tumbling. Larry made a huge blunder by losing $100 million for his bank in just a span of a few months. A missed call in his hand resulted in trades being wiped out, as well as the hedges designed to offset those losses being wiped out. And in that span, Larry went from a legend to a fraud and was banned from First Boston. So now at 36 years old and unemployed, the company that he made $1 billion for and worked for over 12 years meant absolutely nothing at this moment. But Larry wasn't going to give up that easily. With a few aces up his sleeve, he called his boys back from his old club at Kappa Beta Phi. which again happened to have Michael Bloomberg and some of the Goldman Sachs chairmen. So quickly after that, he co-founded the Blackstone Group along with now billionaire investor Steven Schwarzman. They started with only $5 million worth of credit, and by 1993, they were crushing it with over $20 billion under management. But as all good things must come to an end, a power struggle formed between the two titan investors. In 1995, Fink would pressure Schwarzman to sell his stock in Blackstone for $250 million. That is equivalent to over $12 billion today. After that, the two parted ways, and Larry broke off to found Blackrock. By 1999, it went public for $375 million. By 2004, it merged with Merrill Lynch, adding $500 billion to BlackRock's assets. Now, it's at $10 trillion worth in assets under management. That is literally half the United States' entire GDP, which is at $20 trillion. In 2008, the world entered a global financial crisis that hasn't been seen since the Great Depression. And while Wall Street needed Washington to bail them out, who do you think they called to manage the bailout? Well, as you already know, BlackRock. But what makes this even better is that Larry knew about the crash before it even happened, because he was the main player to originally instigate it because of his mortgage-backed securities that had been the fuse all along. The New York Fed even personally went to Larry to help manage $30 billion in toxic assets from Bear Stearns. They brought BlackRock in to advise them on how to handle $100 billion of toxic assets from AIG, and they even contracted BlackRock to deal with the $301 billion of Citigroup's assets, all of which were done behind closed doors with no competitive bidding. And just like that, Larry was more powerful than ever. He went from being the laughingstock of finance to being the linchpin between Washington and Wall Street. In the end, they made at least $200 million off of these contracts in total. The massive size of these contracts and secrecy surrounding them, along with that, BlackRock's enormous influence started to get people talking. So because Larry Fink knew about the financial crash before it even happened, BlackRock's focus on asset management shielded them from the crisis. In fact, this disaster was an opportunity for Larry Fink because Larry was the only man on Wall Street who could fix the crisis. So with Larry's personal connections with Treasury Secretary of Time, Timothy Geithner, BlackRock secured an uncontested contract to manage multiple banks that crumbled during the crisis. But Larry didn't just want Wall Street. He wanted much more than that. I'm talking world banks, governments, and world domination. So how does he do it? Well, because of a breakthrough Blackrock made by offering ETFs. ETFs are a type of investment fund that pulls all the money into all companies in a certain industry. This new investment fund proved wildly popular because of the stability and solid returns. Unsurprisingly, BlackRock became the largest player in this new market, reaching the top of its industry, sucking up money from everywhere using its new money management platform, from the biggest banks to the smallest retirement funds. In 2020, they were approved by the Chinese government to set up a mutual fund in China, making BlackRock the first foreign asset to be green-lighted for this. They also have shares in companies all over Europe, including industries like energy, oil, gas transportation, food, and of course finance. And here's the kicker. BlackRock has what's called circular ownership, where they own shares in companies that own shares in BlackRock. Totally not a conflict of interest. Totally nothing to see here. So they're literally everywhere because of their staggering size and power, and the fact that they largely operate out of sight. BlackRock has what's been called the world's largest shadow bank. BlackRock had a hand in it all, and it was starting to control everything. They bought stakes in pretty much every major corporation on the stock market. If you look into who owns pretty much any major company, you're guaranteed to find BlackRock's name.
They're fighting a war here and they're losing.
Didn't stop there. When you know what hit the fan in March 2020 with COVID, BlackRock came to the rescue for both Wall Street and the government again. The Federal Reserve hired them to help bail out corporations with too much debt, or they needed to borrow money to stay afloat, which again includes corporations that they have huge stakes in. They also helped the Fed purchase more mortgage-backed securities on top of that. So like 2008, the Federal Reserve hired BlackRock to manage their investments to protect them from the coronavirus-led recessions. BlackRock has used this dependence to grow their empire even further, allowing Larry Fink to be a billionaire oligarch that holds unprecedented power over not just the economy, but the entire world. He controls the trends, culture, foreign policy, and the banks. He has world leaders at his beck and call, with BlackRock overseeing assets worth 10% of the world's global economy. BlackRock now owns stakes in every industry, from media companies, banks, oil companies, weapon manufacturers, and in recent years, the consequences are becoming dire as Larry Fink begins to exert his control over the entire globe.
Hi, I'm Fox San Antonio's Jessica Headley.
And I'm Ryan Wolf.
Our greatest responsibility is to serve our Treasure Valley communities,
The El Paso, Las Cruces communities,
Eastern Iowa communities,
Mid-Michigan communities.
We are extremely proud of the quality, balanced journalism that CBS 4 News produces.
But
we are concerned about trouble and trend of irresponsible, one-sided news stories plaguing our country.
One of the ways BlackRock controls the world so well is through its control of the media, together with Vanguard. Vanguard is an investment company that BlackRock partly owns. BlackRock now controls 18% of Fox News, 16% of CBS, 13% of Comcast, who themselves own NBC, MSNBC, CNBC, and Sky News. They even own 12% of Disney. This is extremely important because it means that for any of these companies to decide on any company policy, they now have to consult with BlackRock before doing so. And it's the exact same thing with big tech. BlackRock is now the biggest institutional investor. Google, Facebook, Amazon, and so many more. I mean, the list of their investments in companies is just endless. By extending its reach in such a dramatic way, BlackRock now has control of more than 90% of the media. 90%. That is insane. Almost everything you see and hear on the news and entertainment is crafted to serve one company's demands and requests. BlackRock's control isn't just extending through information in the media, but through the entire world's economic and political data. This is done through Aladdin, where it accurately predicts the outcome of every single investment. Aladdin is basically a supercomputer they use for their clients. Aladdin is a network of 5,000 computers that BlackRock uses to monitor millions of trades and analyze their clients' portfolios 24 hours a day to perform risk analysis. Aladdin is so widespread today that it's basically the central nervous system for many of the largest players in the investment management industry. And for them to offer the service, they have to be granted the access to sensitive data from banks, insurance companies, pension funds, and other important institutions all over the world. This high-end computer farm literally goes over every possible scenario and pinpoints anything that could possibly go wrong, allowing their clients to make the best investment decisions. This means that one company, BlackRock, has an eye on the equivalent of at least 10% of all the stocks and bonds in the entire world. Because of BlackRock's ownerships of banks, insurance companies, social media giants, and even pension funds, Aladdin now possesses huge amounts of personal information on everyone. Everyone has ever knowingly or unknowingly given BlackRock money, and with such a powerful tool under their arsenal, everyone now wants a piece of the pie. By controlling this much data, BlackRock now controls governments because BlackRock can use this data to persuade companies and even government decisions. For example, BlackRock successfully lobbied to get a contract to manage the EU, European Union, regulation of banks. However, this backroom deal is now being investigated as BlackRock themselves own the banks that they should be regulating. They have widespread behind-the-scenes intervention in every company that they have stakes in, and this problem becomes worse since BlackRock owns stakes in all major publicly traded companies.
She was offering full asking price, if not more, but kept losing out to all cash offers. And while Tony doesn't know who the buyers were, the Atlanta area is one of the hottest markets for large financial firms, often backed by private equity, that buy up and rent out single-family homes.
Now with our current recession, BlackRock is buying as much homes and real estate as possible, causing regular house prices to skyrocket. BlackRock profits when a society does not own their homes, but rents, because BlackRock can squeeze even more money out of the economy through mortgaging off these artificially inflated homes. This whole situation becomes even more sinister when you realize BlackRock's power is being compromised by other actors. For example, in August 2020, BlackRock became the first foreign company to be allowed access into China's mutual fund industry. This means that BlackRock can now invest and own parts of Chinese companies. God only knows what BlackRock promised the GCP if they're allowed in, but by being allowed in, BlackRock now works with companies that are blacklisted by the US. One example is BlackRock's investment in a CCP-owned company called Hiki Vision. Hiki Vision makes security and communications technology for both civilian and military use by the Chinese government. They are also known for their wide-scale human rights abuses. This money being invested into China isn't just BlackRock's money. Most of the money comes from the pension funds and bank accounts that ordinary people pay into BlackRock inadvertently. Through BlackRock controlling banks, people have no choice whether they give BlackRock and the CCP this money. This recent trend of BlackRock's funding authoritarian regimes can only mean bad things for the Western democracy, since it empowers regimes like China and Russia, and it gives credence to dystopian regimes. This trend is promoting others to do the same. BlackRock recently recommended that their investors triple their investments in China. This will place billions of more dollars into a dystopian regime at the expense of the West. The worst part is China sees the companies that operate within it as simply extensions of the one-party state. They own these companies, and in return the companies act out the CCP's will, which is a worrying fact considering that BlackRock owns the entire world's data. TikTok's data harvesting is nothing compared to BlackRock's. BlackRock now owns the entire world's bank details, their preferences, their tastes. It sets social trends, and it oversees entire countries, so any increase in Chinese investments will not just see BlackRock's influence grow, but also China's influence growing too. Since August 2020, when BlackRock were first allowed into the Chinese economy, they have only poured more and more money into these Chinese companies. The cherry on top of all of this is that BlackRock is the main force behind the social justice woke culture. In 2018, around the new generation of political correctness, Larry wrote a letter telling all the companies under his thumb to, quote, contribute to society or risk losing our support, adding that, quote, society is demanding that companies both public and private serve a social purpose, end quote. This is a very interesting statement coming from a company that is quite literally funding the persecution of human beings and the imprisonment of the Chinese population. A company that is funding a dystopic nuclear regime that is quite literally threatening the fabric of Western civilization. With BlackRock's push for, quote, social purposes, companies now have an ESG score, or in other words, sustainable investing scores, where you have a rating system based on your company's political and social facades. So for example, doing a woke ad for a company like Nike, or silencing any controversial political views on social media will help you get a high ESG score. Here's a video clip from Adam Curry, who is a podcaster, announcer, internet entrepreneur, and media personality, talking about this subject.
So ESG, and this is now something that if you want to invest in a company, they will, on their investor relations page, they'll show you their ESG score. ESG stands for environmental, social, corporate governance. And this is where the woke culture comes from. So they've created this kind of phony baloney rating system that says, well, if you, I'm exaggerating, but if you mention that you are, have a green agenda and you believe in carbon credits and you might trade some credits somewhere, then you get a higher score and therefore you're more investable. And it's very interesting to see how big investors like insurance company, institutional investors, they are steering away from anything that does not have the right ESG rating.
With Larry Fink's massive influence over the World Economic Forum and his position on the boards on Council of Foreign Relations, Larry Fink's control over everything is just laughable at this point. He has half the USA's GDP, every major corporation caters to him and his parasitic ESG scores, he funds dystopian regimes and no one cares about it or even bats an eye, he has a supercomputer that anyone in major financing would be wetting their pants to get a hold of, and has all information about your entire personal data. He pushes radical trends to divide us more than ever, with no end in sight, but just more bitterness and resentfulness spewed out against each other to keep us distracted from who's really pulling the strings. So perhaps BlackRock is a monument to a world divided between too big to fail companies and the powerless, moneyless, and joyless citizens, where companies like BlackRock buy up all our houses, inflating our currencies, and profit from our conflicts and turmoil. This is why you can't buy a house. This is why we're more divided than ever. This is why too big to fail companies are defining life in the 2020s, because we no longer live under a free market capitalism. We live under an oligarchy ruled by the few, but not by me and you.